Next question. I saw you suggested limiting NSAIDs. Why? Sorry if you've answered this in previous posts. Yeah, so the other day I made a post about what to do if you get injured. And one of the things on there not to do was to take NSAIDs in most cases. If you are an athlete and you get hurt, and say you have another game the next day, or you have another game or another competition or something like that to perform in later that night, then NSAIDs might be a decent idea because your goal in that moment is to feel better, not necessarily to heal. NSAIDs, the AI in NSAIDs is anti-inflammatory. So what they do is they blunt the inflammatory process. Sounds like a good thing, right? Everyone talks about reducing inflammation, really, really good thing for your health overall. And in some cases, it absolutely is. A lot of people go through their lives very, very inflamed because they make really bad choices and they don't train very intelligently, or they don't train at all. They just have a ton of systemic inflammation, joint inflammation, and things like that. However, in this case, we're talking about inflammation as part of the healing process. And it's a very important part of the healing process and not necessarily a part that you want to blunt if your goal is to heal, not feel better. So say you roll your ankle and you have several weeks before you need to actually perform on that ankle. Instead of taking NSAIDs to feel better and reduce the inflammation and slow the healing down, you're going to not take NSAIDs so that your body can go through its anti-inflammatory process. Instead, you would take something like a Tylenol or acetaminophen that is non-anti-inflammatory. It's a pain reliever and a fever reducer, but it's not anti-inflammatory, so it still allows your body to go through its anti-inflammatory process, but you also get a little bit of pain relief. So you can still kind of use that to your advantage to perform as you go. Of course, you want to be a little bit cautious with any of these things. I'll talk about NSAIDs here in a second, but you want to be cautious with like taking Tylenol on an empty stomach or taking too much of it because it's a little bit rough on the liver. But if you take it very, very occasionally and you take the right doses of it, you're going to be totally fine. And it could be a decent idea if you really are in so much pain that you need it. Ideally, you don't necessarily take any of that kind of stuff, and you kind of let your body naturally heal, keep it mobile, and give it some time. But sometimes you might need to go and do something on that leg or whatever you're hurting, whatever you hurt, and that might be a case where you would go and take some Tylenol. Taking NSAIDs in general is also something you definitely want to consider not doing. NSAIDs are very rough on the stomach. A lot of people get ulcers from chronic NSAID use. A lot of people, it can mess up your kidneys if you take it kind of chronically. Some people literally live off this shit. And it's okay to take NSAIDs once in a while, but I highly suggest not living off them. Additionally, taking them after a training session or for a training session, a lot of athletes take NSAIDs like before their training sessions because they're always so banged up. And ironically, one of the reasons they're probably always banged up is because the more you take this kind of stuff, the less your body actually is able to naturally begin the anti-inflammatory cascade. Like your body's ability to naturally reduce your own inflammation gets a little bit blunted because it's kind of just used to constantly getting a outside source of anti-inflammatory treatment. Additionally, taking it anytime around training, especially if you are trying to gain muscle, is also not a very good idea because, again, inflammation, everyone thinks it's bad, but inflammation is an important part of the recovery and adaptation process. This is why you also don't necessarily want to do cold therapy, ice baths, cold tubs, etc. around your training sessions because it's going to blunt that inflammatory response and it's going to make you feel better, but it's not going to make you heal better. So there's a big difference between feeling better and actually healing and getting back to where you were. And to actually heal, whether it's from a training session or from injury of some sort, the inflammatory process is a desired outcome. So that's the main reason. Those are the main reasons I recommend not doing NSAIDs. In most cases, of course, there are plenty of exceptions, but if you're in doubt, I would stay away from them and choose something different. This was also along the lines of the RICE protocol, rest, ice, compress, and elevate. That was the old treatment thing for rolled ankles or bum knees or anything like that. And because it reduces inflammation and it immobilizes the joint, it is maybe going to make it feel better, but it's also not going to make it heal better. And for it to heal better, you want to be putting it in positions of function. So you roll your ankle, instead of just ricing it, you want to move it. Not necessarily in a way that's going to be super painful, but doing some ankle circles, getting some blood flow down there is hugely important and a much better option than rice. Rice is very outdated. I actually saw this on Reddit the other day. Someone recommended rice. It was an army medic too. So I was very, very disappointed that he was not up to date on his medical knowledge. And yeah, of course, I'm not a doctor. Listen to your doctor. But at the same time, those are my recommendations on treading carefully around NSAID use.